backyard, the barrier reef here. It's the only one in the continental US. So our only barrier reef, which makes a lot of sense when you think about tourism in the area. Of course, it's going to be a hot spot for people to come, especially divers and fishermen. It's actually the third largest in the world. Does anybody here know the first largest? Australia, yeah, so it's the Great Barrier Reef. And then does anybody know the second largest? This one I've never had somebody actually answer. I didn't know it till I was told either.
Then the Red Sea?
No, not the Red Sea. That's a great guess though. They have beautiful corals. It's actually going to be off of the coast of Mexico, and then it goes along Belize, Guatemala's coast, and it ends in Honduras. This is called the Mesoamerican Reef. So very unheard of in the coral, in the regular reef world, but when we're looking at sizes, the third largest, ours, is going to be 360 miles. The Mesoamerican is going to be double that, so it's going to be upwards of 600 miles. And then when we look at the Great Barrier Reef, we're going to times that by 5, and we're about 1,400 miles. So ours is going to be having a net worth of $8.5 billion. So that's going to provide about $2 billion in local income and provide 74,000 jobs to the local area. But the sad thing currently is that only 3% of our stony corals remain, which is not great for our economy. So we'll talk about efforts like Reef Renewals that are restoring the reef. So here's a really good visual that shows y'all, I want to stand out of your way, but our barrier reef here runs all the way from the Dry Tortugas up to Martin County. You can kind of see it in this far corner too. So that's the 360-mile stretch that I was just telling you about. So when we look at different types of shallow reefs, there's really going to be 4 major ones: atoll, barrier, which is ours, fringing, and patch. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how those are formed. So basically, from the far left, we'll start with fringing. You can see that there's a central landmass, and then right off the coast is going to be a reef. So that's much different than ours, but most of these reefs are going to start in this kind of formation. So how this forms is a coral larvae will be swimming. Yes, they can swim, which is kind of crazy. They're not good swimmers though, so the current's still going to kind of push them towards the coastline, and it's going to settle on a hard substrate like the coastline of a continent or an island. And then fast forward 10,000 years, you're going to have a fringing reef. Then in the middle, how we get a barrier reef is actually take a fringing reef and then have sea level rise. So that's actually really interesting when it comes to the Florida Keys, since the Upper Keys is an old reef. So what happened was the sea level dropped and then the coral reef fossilized. So if you look in seawalls, you can actually see skeletons of corals in the Upper Keys. The Lower Keys were sandbars, so a little bit different of a process there. So how we still had a fringing reef at the time, then the sea level rose, creating that deeper lagoon and the barrier formation. And then if you look all the way to the far right, you'll see this is how an atoll looks. So you can see there's no landmass. So take that fringing reef, usually around a volcanic island, and then sea level is going to rise to completely submerge the landmass. And I have a good visual of how that happens in this corner, if everybody can see. You can see it starting at that fringing reef, then going to a barrier, and finally being completely submerged as an atoll. And then over here on the left, you can see really good drawing that my fellow intern Eva Fair did, where the fringing reef is close to the landmass with somewhat of a shallow lagoon. And then you can see a bigger lagoon and then our barrier reef. And then finally all the way in the corner, you'll see the atoll, which is usually found in deeper waters. So atolls, there's upwards of 400, and they're only really found in the Pacific Ocean. Barrier reefs are going to be found in the tropics and the subtropics. Patch reefs can really be found anywhere that there's a fringing reef or a barrier reef. Those are just from reproducing corals on barrier fringing reefs. And then fringing reefs are going to be found in Western Australia, the Caribbean, and the Red Sea. So where are coral reefs? So we're used to shallow water reefs in the area. If you see over here, we have a star at the very top. So our shallow water reefs in the barrier reef is going to really be only found 30 meters deep. So a meter is part of the metric system. It's about 3.3 feet approximately, to give you kind of like a frame of reference. So usually our barriers, atolls, fringing, and patch will be found in those 30 meters. Then below it is something called a mesophotic reef. So as you're going downwards, you can see it's right there. They can be found about 150 meters deep in the water. They're really interesting because similar species are found in these shallow water reefs that are also found in mesophotic. However, temperature drops as you go deeper in the ocean. So they're living at different temperatures, which is really interesting. And then they're also having less access to light, which we'll talk about why that's essential later. And then we have deep sea coral reefs all the way at the bottom. Those are found at about 3,000 meters. At least that's the deepest point that they can be found at. and there is no light availability down there. Water temperatures are going to drop from that 74 to 84 optimal coral growth all the way down to about 38 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's going to be a drastic difference when it comes to what they're able to survive in. So what is a coral? Does anybody recognize this coral formation at the top? Has anybody seen this? Show of hands in the area? Yeah. So this is going to be elkhorn coral. If you look at that large mass, that's not one organism. It's composed of thousands, if not millions, of tiny organisms. So coral are living animals. If you look on this left image, that's going to be a coral polyp. So each polyp is its own individual organism, but they're colonial. So you'll find them in a large group on the same structure. And then zoomed in really close, you can see a coral polyp. They have tentacles around a central mouth. They actually eat plankton. That's going to compose about 10% of their diet. And we'll talk about the other 90% in a second. But they're also closely related to jellyfish and, well, sea jellies, they're not a fish, and sea anemones, which are in the phylum Cnidaria. And they all look somewhat similar in structure. At some point in their life. So on the far left is going to be a sea jelly actually in the beginning life stages. So this is called a jelly polyp, similar to the coral polyp. And then you'll see the sea anemone structure. So basically what all three of these organisms share are something called nematocysts. Show of hands, has anybody ever been stung by a jelly before? Yeah, so what's stinging you is called a nematocyst. It's a stinging cell. So sea anemones, corals, and jellies all have nematocysts. Just different levels of venom. So this is going to be a coral polyp. You can definitely see the similarities in structure. They have the tentacles, which contain nematocysts with central mouths and cylinder bodies. So we have a special question, and for answering it correctly, you get a hat. How did the Florida Keys form, and how did the reef form? Yeah, perfect. The rise and fall. Good job. You get a hat. Perfect. Good job. So we're going to talk about different types of corals. Has anybody ever seen a sea fan in the reef around here? Yeah. So those are a type of coral. Yeah, you've seen it. So those are a type of soft corals. There's also something called hard corals. The major difference between the two is what forms their skeleton. So our sea fans and sea whips, or anything that basically looks like sea grass and branching, something that looks kind of like a tree almost, is going to be usually a soft coral. Their skeletons are made of a protein. When we look at our hard corals, also called stony corals, their skeleton's going to be made of calcium carbonate, which is the main component of limestone. So if you see the ones on your table, you can actually touch them. They kind of feel like rocks. It makes a lot of sense. But then when we look at our hard corals, there's two major groups. One's called branching, one's called boulder. So if you look at this far right, we have our elkhorn coral again. As you can tell, it looks like a branch. And then in the middle, on the bottom, you can see that our boulder coral looks like a boulder. So pretty self-explanatory. The corals that we work with at Reef Renewal USA are going to be star corals and brain corals when it comes to boulders. So that's a subcategory of the two. These are all ones that we currently have in our nursery. My favorite is personally the monstrous star one. And then when we look at our boulders, or our brain corals and our branching corals, you can definitely see the difference in structure type. The main two branching corals that we work with are going to be elkhorn and staghorn. We do have some ivory tree and blade fire coral. Personally, not a big fan of the fire coral. I've been stung by it many times. So this is where our light interaction comes from. So zooxanthellae are going to be a microscopic algae that live in the tissue of corals. Has anybody ever seen a bleached coral before? Yeah, you have some on your table as well, so you can look at those if you haven't. But basically what bleached coral means is zooxanthellae left the tissue of the coral. So they provide the beautiful colors that we can see in this image, but they're also what makes up that other 90% of the diet of the coral I was telling you about. So how this relationship works is the zooxanthellae are in the tissue and they're photosynthesizing, which is why light is essential as well, which is why deep sea reefs are so fascinating, because there's no light availability, but the corals down there still live. They don't have zooxanthellae though. But has anybody seen this jellyfish before in the area? Cassiopeia, also known as upside down jellies. Have you ever seen them actually upside down? Yeah, does anybody know why they do that? So they're photosynthesizing as well. They have zooxanthellae inside of them that photosynthesizes and makes up a majority of their diet. So you can definitely see the evolutionary relationship between the two organisms. So a little bit more about coral bleaching. When you look at the far left image, you'll see a happy, healthy coral. It's gonna have these beautiful, vibrant colors, and it has tons of zooxanthellae within that tissue. But as sea temperatures start to rise, the zooxanthellae get stressed, and they're like, this is not optimal, I have to leave, these conditions are poor. So they start leaving the coral's tissue, and the color of the coral starts becoming paler, since they provide the pigment. And then eventually, if that stress continues on them and the water quality is not fixed, they will bleach. Raise your or thumbs up if you think a bleached coral is an alive coral. Thumbs down if you think it's dead. We got a pretty good mix, So it's actually alive. So bleached corals have a few weeks to a few months to have water quality conditions reverted to what's optimal for them before they die. So if you look over on this image on the left, I'm gonna kind of move out of it. I'll move this way. You'll see that middle stage is gonna be bleached, but when you go all the way over to the right, we'll see a dead coral is going to have kind of turfing algae on it as well. But again, it has weeks to months, depending on the species, to have those water quality conditions return to normal before it dies. But if you remember, if you take away 90% of your diet, you're actively starving. So that's what's happening to bleached corals. Here's a good image from our nursery of this happening. So far left you can see is bleached, the middle coral is going to be stressed, but then the far two corals on the right are completely fine. So why does this happen? There's different genotypes within species. So this can happen between different species. All of the ones here are D-lab, which is a type of species that we grow or that we take care of, but they're different genotypes of each. So they can have different susceptibilities when it comes to temperature. It could change a degree temperature, it could rise 0.5, and then one coral would completely survive and another could die. It just depends. So, stony coral tissue disease, has anybody ever heard of this? No, yes? Okay, amazing. So if you look on our graph on the left, stony coral tissue disease was introduced to Virginia Key off of Miami in 2014. It took about till 2017 to reach the top in Martin County of our barrier reef, and then in 2021, it reached all the way down to the dry tortugas. Basically, as you can tell from the image over here, you'll see that the coral tissue is actually lost. It's hard to see in a visual, but basically, if you look at the corals on your table, a bleached coral will still have its tissue. A stony coral, or an infected coral is going to completely lose that tissue and show the skeleton beneath. So instead of just losing their color, they're sloughing off their tissue, which is killing the coral actively. So basically, they don't know what causes stony coral tissue disease to this day, even though it's been around for so long, but they found out that there's a bacterial component to the spread of the disease. So they've created an antibiotic that Kevin actually has applied to corals. So they apply it around the rim where the coral has lost the tissue to stop the spread, and that's been working on some corals. But when it was introduced all the way down and across the barrier reef, it impacted about half of the stony corals that we have. And the mortality rates between species depend. Some are completely killed, and some are able to recover and regrow that tissue over a series of years. So what other threats are facing our reef? We know that we're having rising temperatures from climate change, and that's resulting in bleached corals. And then we know that stony coral tissue disease is spreading. Not sure why, but that it's spreading across the reef. So we also have ocean acidification and pollution are kind of closely tied. Basically, anything that's going to change the water quality is going to impact corals. So I know you guys only in the Keys received a sewage system in the last like 25 years. So prior to that, all the sewage was being dumped directly into the ocean. Of course, that's going to change the water quality and impact the corals that are right off your lagoon. And then ocean acidification, basically as the pH drops and becomes more acidic, it's going to actually dissolve the calcium carbonate skeleton that makes up a coral. So again, not survivable. And then when we look at overfishing and destructive fishing practices, it can get kind of complex. So basically, has anybody heard of trawling? I'm sure in a fishing room, potentially, yeah. So you take a big net and you drag it on the seafloor to get different fish. That's going to destroy reefs if you're doing it over there. But also destructive boating practices. So anchoring on a reef can be really destructive to the corals. And then also, running aground a vessel can be very destructive to corals. Another thing though is overfishing. So if you're overfishing different types of fish that eat algae off corals, you're going to eventually kill corals indirectly, since algae actually grows over corals and can outcompete them for light and different nutrient resources. So why are reefs important? Why should you care about not doing destructive practices and doing destructive boating? That is because they're a biodiversity hotspot. So basically 25% of organisms that live in the ocean at one point in their life live in a reef. And the reefs only make up 1% of the ocean. So they're very important, essential hotspots for organisms, and there's not a lot of them. They also provide climate change mitigation. So anybody remember the hurricanes that we had a few weeks ago? Basically, what they do is they'll take surge of waves and absorb the energy, and that'll keep those massive storms from impacting us on land. That's also going to tie into our coastal protection. So it's going to stop erosion. The keys aren't that big, as you all can see, so we don't want any of it eroding away. They're also going to provide fisheries support. So a lot of juvenile fish will start their life in the reef before they go into the open ocean for commercial fishing. So that's also really important that we protect it for that. And if you remember, we have about $8 billion tied to the reef as a value, and $2 billion of our local income is coming from that. So we definitely want to protect it for tourism and subsequently our economy. Oh, sorry, wrong direction. So has anybody heard of a keystone species before? So basically this term means an organism is essential to an ecosystem functioning, and if they were to be removed, it could result in a large impact, usually negatively. So as you can see from our first image, that's a happy, healthy reef. We have barracuda, we have different types of fish, spraying coral and branching coral. And then if you look over to the left, all of our coral is gone. So what happens now? In this image, sorry, I'm in the way. In this image, does anybody see something that happens when the coral disappears? What implications could happen next? Fish. Yeah, good job. So the fish would get eaten, right? They no longer have shelter or support or any habitat that's provided by the reef. And then eventually when the shark and barracuda eat all the fish, what happens to them? Yeah, they go bye-bye. Either they leave or they'll die from not having another food source. So we actually have two keystone species that we work with at Reef Renewal. It's going to be staghorn coral and elkhorn coral. So when we look at a reef, these are going to provide structure. They're going to be the ones that are really absorbing the wave impact as well from big storms. But they really build the reef and keep it functioning as a habitat. Ooh, we have another special question. So what is the relationship between zooxanthellae and coral? How is this relationship impacted by warming water temperatures? For a hat. Another hat. Anybody? Anybody? I'll give you a hint. Zooxanthellae are the things that live in their tissue. They're the algae. Does anybody remember what they do for the coral? Huh? Not quite close.
Synthesize life.
Close. They make up 90% of their
Color.
They do provide color, but not exactly what I'm looking for. Remember, if they're bleaching, they're starving.
Food.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody back there said food, so I feel like you get it. Here's your hat. Of course. So how is their relationship impacted by warming waters? Does anybody remember what happens when the zooxanthellae have warm waters? They leave. So that's where that starvation comes from. Has anybody ever heard of an indicator species? No? So this is another kind of niche word, but basically an indicator species means we can all look at a reef, right? I'm sure all of you have seen the reef in the area, and you can notice when things are missing. So an indicator species is an indicator to us, if they're missing, that the ecosystem is unhealthy. So as you can see in our right image, the nurse shark is missing. They're really, really tiny, but there are sea urchins in there, and they're also missing on the right side. And then some of our coral is bleached, or it's also missing. So those are going to be our really big indicator species to, hey, something's not right, this ecosystem isn't working, and it's not healthy. So bleaching is an indication of that, but long spine sea urchins, talking about algae again. So what the sea urchins do is they eat macroalgae on corals, and that's going to, again, help them from outcompeting and dying because of that macroalgae. So thanks for listening to my little ecology lesson. I'm going to tell you more about what we do as an organization now. So our vision and our mission is really important. We want to produce and outplant resilient corals of the future at an unprecedented scale, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. But if you look over here on the right, you can see our founder, Ken Nedemeyer, working on a vern. So that's a vertical rope nursery. Basically, this is an innovative design that we implemented in our nurseries where we're growing corals on a rope, which if you think about it is kind of jarring, but it's gonna reduce a lot of material costs and it's gonna reduce a lot of manpower when it comes to upkeeping these corals. So that's another really important thing to Reef Renewal, is to stay as sustainable as possible while also being innovative in the changing climate. So a little bit more about our operations. We have 3 main nurseries. We also have something called pop-up nurseries, which are just these on a smaller scale and usually closer to reefs. But our main nursery is going to be in Tavernier. We have upwards of 100 active coral trees in there. And then Marathon, since the bleaching event of last year, isn't as active. But we also have one down in Lukey, which is a mirror image of Tavernier, just on a smaller scale right now. Another fun question. How can you tell if a reef is unhealthy? What organisms are essential to keeping our reefs healthy? We just talked about this. Does anybody remember that how can you tell if a reef is unhealthy? Blank species.
Indicator.
You get a hat. Good job. Yay. I feel like Oprah. Let's see if we can get the second one. What organisms are essential to keeping our reefs healthy? Do you remember? It's the other one. Not indicator species, but blank species. Starts with a K. You got it. You get another hat. Why not? Perfect. Good job. So more about our nurseries. This is the layout. It's kind of hard to see, but it's based off of a grid structure. This is our Marathon one, but again, our Lukey and Tavernier are going to mirror this. So on the far left, we'll have our elkhorn corals, and then down below will be those ferns. So elkhorn corals we can grow on normal coral trees, and we can also grow them on those vertical rope nurseries that we showed you. I might have an image here, yeah. So if you see in the far left, usually we're gonna grow our corals on these PVC constructed trees. So what do we do nursery maintenance wise? So our corals have to be clean, because remember, there's something that outcompetes them. Does anybody remember what sea urchins eat off of them that outcompetes them? Parrotfish also eat this off corals.
Algae.
Yeah.
Algae, good job. I feel like I'm gonna switch it up. I'll give it to both of you because you said it. You both said it. Little sustainability pass. Good job. Teamwork. And then you can see the vertical rope nursery next to it. So basically on the left we have boulder coral frags growing on them. So what a frag is, you can see in the middle as well. They're going to be these tiny little plugs. And the purpose of growing these are to outplant them back onto the reef, because that's our goal, right? To restore the reef. And then on the far right we have something called broodstock trays. So these are basically to grow more corals. These images are both taken within 4 months, so you can see that they grew quite well and quite quickly. So our broodstocks are going to grow out, and we're going to do something called fragging, which you'll see here. So on the left you can see we're cutting a star coral, and then in the middle you can see it actually exploded out. So the frags are going to be these pieces right here, and then the broodstock are going to be the middle ones, followed by more frags on top. So we're going to put those on the tray. On the bottom is going to be our frags, and then on top is going to be our broodstock. You can also see in the middle image they're actively gluing frags on. And then we're going to outplant them. So once they grow big and strong, just like we want them to, we put them back onto the reef. My favorite thing about this process, you can see one of our founders, Ken, on the far left, is with his little Parmesan cheese containers. So we mix cement, and then we utilize these containers to put the domes on the reef, which you can see Megan doing in the middle. We have little cement domes. And cement, does anybody know what cement's made of? For a sustainability pack? I said this word earlier.
Lime.
Lime? Oh, you guys both got it. Limestone. Good job. You and you, I think, right? Perfect. Good job. I'm out of hats. So it's made of limestone. Yeah?
I have a question on those on the ropes when you're going there for.
I can go back.
How deep?
How deep are? So all of our nurseries are about 30 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, but they're also going to be, I believe it's about 10 feet or at least 8 feet from the surface, so that they don't get impacted by different boatings. But yeah, they're really, really large. And if you look, I lost it, but I have another photo of somebody dragging one. So that's kind of interesting as well. Great question though. So we know that cement is made of limestone. Do you remember what the coral skeleton's made of? Who, was that you? Beautiful! Another sustainability guy? You guys are winning. So calcium carbonate, as we talked about, is going to be the main component of limestone. So when we're putting cement back on the reef, we're not doing any damage. So I just wanted to kind of dispel that idea. But when you come over here, you can see we have a hammer. So we take a hammer and we claw away at the rock, ripping up algae. It's almost like a carpet when it comes up. And then we put the cement dome down and we let it sit for a second. I learned the hard way, if you touch cement too much, it just dissolves. Oops, don't do that. You leave it for a second and then you put the little frag plugs in. We do about 15 per dome. And then when we're doing our branching corals, we do about 10 per dome. So, does anybody remember the bleaching event of last year? Did you see or notice a lot more bleach? Yeah. Does anybody remember the temperature of the water being really, really high? Yeah, wasn't even comfortable to swim in. So this is a graph that's going to kind of illustrate that. If you look, I'm going to get up on stage again. So this dotted line in the middle is going to be our median of our surface temperature in the North Atlantic. But then if you look at this red line right here, it's kind of orangish. That's going to be 2015. Was anybody here in 2015? Yeah, there was another bleaching event that was pretty large back then during 2015 due to these really high temperatures. But then if you look at this red line that comes in, this is 2023. So of course we had really a ton of bleaching. I believe it was upwards of like 90% of the corals on the reef did die due to this. I talked about our marathon nursery. We did have a lot, throughout all of our nurseries in the Keys, had a lot of bleaching that occurred and a lot of mortality because of that. But then if you see the rate of 2024 is going to be this beginning line. So you can tell that the ramifications of that temperature continued into this year. This is going to be a more updated graph. The blue line is going to be 2024 so far, which you can see is almost comparable to the temperatures of last year. Does anybody know why we're not seeing bleaching events of this year?
Because it's already damaged.
Good job, yeah. So, sustainability thought?
Give it to somebody else.
Sustainability thought? Yes. Here? Beautiful, amazing. I love the sharing. Okay, so yeah, so it's already dead. So we already had 90% mortality rate on the reef, so that's why we're not getting that implication today. However, the good thing is we now know what genotypes to invest in, what corals we want to continue to raise in our nursery and outplant on the reef. So despite the fact that it was devastating to the reef, it did provide us information scientifically. And we do have successful outplants. So basically, you can't see it very well in this lighting, but on the left, this is in August of last year, and our coral bleached. So that's what this image is. But then a few months later, in October, you can see that it actually did fully recover. So that's amazing that we had those temperatures revert enough for certain species to survive. Special question, we'll do a hat again. People like the hat more. So, why is it important to not fish in coral nurseries? I didn't tell you this. So, can anybody infer? Why would it be bad? Yeah?
Because the fish are eating the algae off.
Good job! That's amazing! You got it! Good job! And I didn't even directly say it, so that's great. That's great. So yeah, we have parrotfish in our nursery that eat the algae off, that keep the coral alive. Does anybody know the term ghost gear? Yeah. So basically, for those that don't, ghost gear is going to be, say you have a lobster trap that you put out, and you don't go back for it and leave it and it gets stuck in the ocean, or you have a net that you cut and you leave in the ocean. It's going to be pollution and gear that's still in there causing entanglement, hurting the reef because it's blocking light for corals, different things like that. That's going to be ghost gear that can also end up in our nurseries. And what that can do is rip apart our trees. It can ruin our lines and make them float away. So that's another reason we want to always be practicing safe fishing. So where do we go from here? So during 2024, or 2023 bleaching event, what we learned is we need to invest more into our land-based facilities. So we have one in Ruskin now, which is in the Tampa area, where we take a lot of our corals from our Tavier nursery right now and put into there. So what this does is eliminate the manpower necessary to clean corals, since they're in a closed system facility, but it's also allowing us to upscale our coral production quite a bit. So our goal for next year is to outplant 25,000 corals, and we're definitely capable of doing this with the current corals that we have because of our Ruskin facility. And it's also keeping them safe from rising temperatures as well. but while we're also keeping our nurseries to see what genotypes are going to survive that. And as an acclimation period. Another thing that we're doing is tracking genotypes. So we're looking more closely at what's surviving on the reef and doing more monitoring of corals that we have outplanted so that we can continue to invest our efforts into those corals. And then finally, evolve. So one thing that RUSA is really good at is constantly evolving with the changing climate crisis by opening a land facility, by switching from coral trees to burns to eliminate more waste. So that's something that we're constantly doing. So what can you do? So at the top, you'll see some images of volunteers working with our organization. You can volunteer if you're a diver, or we have land days where we do fragging or constructing trays, which you can see over there, or you can dive with us if you are a diver. Then at the bottom, I have QR codes, but they're also easily accessible online. This is going to be our first one over here is marine debris reporting and removal program. You can do this as beach cleanups, or you can do it while diving. Basically what this code takes you to is a website where you can report different debris, which is another way that you can help the ecosystem. Bleach Watch is going to be where you can actively report where you see coral bleaching. For all of those that said yes to have you seen bleaching before, you can actually get trained to be an observer for free and upload different photos of bleaching that you see to help save, or to help scientists learn where bleaching is occurring and investigate those areas a little bit more. Then Reef Injury Prevention and Response Program is basically a website where you can go and report different vessel groundings, or if you anchored on a reef and it dragged, you can report that and an organization will go out and repair that. So if we have some youth, but if you know a youth, I and my fellow intern Eva actually run a youth science advisory committee. So we have kids actually from all over the country are a part of it. Our furthest is probably California. We meet once a month and we tell them about different coral news in the world, what our RUSA is up to. So if they'd like to join, they're more than welcome to email me at Ashley@Reef_Renewal or Eva. It got cut out, but hers is Eva. And then if you want, we have QR codes for donating, getting involved, signing up for our email, and then also our Instagram, which is another great way to learn about opportunities that we're involved with. Does anybody have any questions?
As far as your trees, how much damage have you seen from
Storms?
Storms, somebody dragging lines?
We had a lobster trap in our Liu Key nursery take, I think it was more than 10 trees that it took out. In Tavernier, we haven't had that issue as much. So when it comes to weather, it depends on the storm. When we had, I believe it was Helene, we lost one tree during that. So what we do every time we lose a tree is we look what failed. Was it the anchor? Was it the buoys? Like what happened? And then we come up with new ideas to prevent that, which has brought us from losing quite a few trees over the years down to just one or two here and there.
Great question. Marked out there so boaters know to stay out of this area, or?
That's a great question. Yeah. So if you, in the last couple of years, if you've seen on your GPS a no fishing zone, a new one pop up, that's actually because it's a coral nursery. There's certain ones that are no longer no fish, which is great. And then also when you're in the water, each tree is tagged. So if we do lose it by chance and somebody finds it, they can call us and it says like keep submerged because corals need to be underwater, and then we're able to go and pick them up. That actually happened a few weeks ago with us. We got called on one of our burns, lost from Tavernier area. We went searching for it. We didn't find it, but we did find a coral tree that we lost before the storms. And all the coral was alive, which is insane. So that was a really cool experience to be a part of. Great questions. Anybody else? No, that's fair. So, quick acknowledgements to all of our partners. These are everyone. Oh, you can't see it, but that's okay. And then if you'd like, you can enter for the raffle. We have different goodies. Some of you have a lot of hats now, so you might not want to. But we also have some water bottles as well. So if you'd like. But thank you guys so much for listening to me talk a lot. I appreciate it.